This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome to the Confessions podcast. It's the first of the new year from your friends here at the BBC, although the best of 2017 is going like the clappers.
It is, isn't it? But it's, 2017.
What does that actually mean?
Going like the clappers.
What are the clappers?
Phrase.
The things like this.
Is that what it is?
I think it's those clapper things. Do you remember as a kid?
Yeah.
You had, I think there's a clappers.
They were clackers.
Yeah.
And, you're right.
And they were banned.
Yeah, you're right.
Because they used to break your wrist.
Didn't you put clackers on your ankles?
What?
Was another clacker?
That was only if you went to one of those strange schools.
Paid
You
extra.
probably could, but then you'd break your ankle.
Okay, I think, anyway, maybe we're getting our
I think we're
clappers and our
talking about-
They were
clackers
very good
mixed up.
because they
Two
made that
different
noise, but then if you missed, then they hit you on the wrist, and so schools banned them. You said,
I'm
you can't
thinking
have-
of the wooden stick with the clackers on.
That was in Victorian times.
Oh, okay.
That was
What's
like 1830.
Castanets.
No, it's a thing that you twiddle round and round. It's like it's got little things on it. I'm not explaining it. It's not for radio. I'll bring one in.
One of those.
Slightly off topic.
Wasn't I was on topic.
No,
We were
no,
on
you were
clackers.
keeping us on topic.
You two.
Anyway.
Yeah, anyway.
This is all acceptable because it's slightly shorter than normal podcast. Well, it was. Because there was only 3 confessions, plus you get the big epic one at the end from the archives. This is because we had a shorter week. I was here on Monday. Bobby was here on Monday.
Yes.
Matt could not be bothered.
Come on.
So this week we have Doc of Dixon's Green's Confession Caught by the Fuzz. We have Mark's Sorry Story, Love Me, Love My Dog. Plus, we've unearthed another classic confession from the crypt chosen by you. For our first podcast of 2018, we have Gary's Tale, Scout to the Top, who some people texted in to say was the best confession of 2018. So maybe we peaked too early.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Father Simon and the Confessing Mutual. As a Reformed is a winning opening sentence. As a Reformed Scottish Presbyterian Church minister,
Here we go.
I have to admit a bit of unease at asking from forgiveness from anyone but our good Lord. But hey, if it gets me on the radio, and more, but more importantly, a bit of peace, I'll give it a try. This is the Reverend Gary here, Scottish Presbyterian Church minister, asking us for forgiveness. My tale goes back long before ordination to when I was a teenager in the 80s. I was working hard for my bronze Duke of Edinburgh award in the Scouts in Ayrshire. Part of the award was demonstrating a skill of some sort or other, and I was wondering what to do. Then I remembered that a few years before I had, despite showing absolutely no musical talent at all, had somehow managed to convince my mother that piano lessons would be a good idea. Being a good mum, she consulted friends, and a piano tutor was sourced and a trial lesson booked. I do confess to being a little shy in those days, so my mother came along with me to the first lesson, which took place in the piano teacher's house. It was there that I got my first experience of Mrs. Van Straten. She was an elderly lady, but with a strangely fine head of black hair. When we first arrived, she was finishing off the previous lesson. As some unfortunate teenager finished her lesson, Mrs. Van Straten, who I'd come to learn was a rather strict, foreboding and sometimes fierce tutor in a kind of Miss Jean Brodie style, was playing to the gallery, basically me and my mum. As she barked instructions to this girl, she was also delighting in asking us loads of questions. More of an interrogation, really. Question number 3 on her list was, "What kind of piano do you have?" I immediately looked at my feet and my mother mumbled sheepishly, "Well, we don't actually have a piano." I thought Mrs. Van Straten was going to explode, but my mother eventually calmed her down, explaining that we would get one if I enjoyed the lessons, and that in the meantime we had an arrangement with our church that I could practice on their piano. So there you go. It's a perfect, really, really perfect answer from Mrs. Van Straten there. Despite this poor start, the rest of the lesson went well, and it was agreed that I would indeed start weekly tuition. And so began several years of terrifying and in many ways fruitless lessons as Mrs. Van Straten tried to turn a talentless musician like me into some sort of piano prodigy. I think it dawned on her pretty quickly that this lump of coal was never going to be a diamond, as I often murdered the various pieces that she gave me. However, the upside for me was that several years later, when I was looking for a skill to do for my Duke of Edinburgh award, I was able to faithfully log my lessons, which were then helping me towards meeting all the requirements for the Bronze Award. Many months later, I was beside myself with excitement when I was told that I had met all the requirements for the Bronze DOE and that I was to be presented with the badge and certificate during one of our Scout meetings on a Friday night. I was also told that I could invite some guests who had helped me in my achievement. Well, obviously my long-suffering parents, who'd put up with my intolerable practising, would have to be invited. And as I thought who else might swell with pride as I collected my award, in a moment of graciousness, I thought about Mrs. Van Straten. So the invites were sent, and I was delighted when she told me at the next lesson that she would love to attend, and that she also accepted the offer of a lift from my parents. The day arrived, and it was a cold and very wet, dark evening when I turned up at our scout hut in my perfectly ironed uniform. When the allotted time came for the guests to file from the pre-award drinks upstairs, I anxiously scanned the room to see where my parents and Mrs. Van Straten would be sitting. As I looked around, I could only see my mother sitting there, and as I caught her eye, she proceeded to shake her head in a very serious manner. In italics, that, by the way.
Wow.
Is that how you shake your head?
Because I don't know how badly this is going to go wrong. It's not apparent yet, but
It's not.
I believe
It's one
it's
of those
going to
with
be.
me. I've got no idea.
Poor old Gary.
Not knowing what she meant, I took my place in the line of other scouts awaiting their awards. After the ceremony, I rushed over to see my mum, who had then been joined by my rather flustered father, and I asked where Mrs. Van Straten was. This is the point, Father Simon, where I need to tell you that our scout hut used to be at the top of a small hill, at the end of a rather dark street. The hall had no car park, and spaces directly outside the hall were at a premium. A pavement ran up the street to the hall, but stopped there and was replaced by a grass verge that ran up the rest of the hill. You've got a map there. As I excitedly waited for the invited guests to arrive, it transpired that my father had arrived and tried to park his car as close to the hall as possible to save Mrs. Van Straten walking too far in the now torrential rain. He gallantly turned the car and parked her next to the grass verge on the same side as the hall. What he didn't notice was the rather large hole that an electricity company had dug and subsequently failed to illuminate or fence off. So as his car came to a stop, Mrs. Van Straten opened the door, stepped out, and like she's in a cartoon, fell directly into a large 6-foot-deep, pitch-dark, muddy hole. Took quite a few minutes for my father in the dark to work out where she'd gone.
Dear.
Mrs. Van Straten. Took many more minutes for him to retrieve the rather bewildered, muddy and extremely soggy piano teacher from said hole. Being rather unimpressed with the whole situation, as it were, she switched into Miss Jean Brodie mode and demanded to be taken home immediately, hence her absence from the award ceremony. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not for myself and not from Mrs. Van Straten, as she was not the most pleasant of people, but rather I seek absolution for my poor father, who not only had to retrieve a rather soggy Mrs. Van Straten from the bottom of a 6-foot muddy hole, but who, after he finally managed to bundle her back into the car, noticed that she was now bald, and he had to go back into the hole, which was, as I mentioned, dark and rather muddy.
To get the ferret. Yeah.
To get the black wig. He's never told me what Mrs. Van Straten said to him on the car journey back, but he still twitches whenever her name is mentioned. And amazingly, the subject was never brought up again at any future lessons. But Gary, think of all the sermons that you can get out of that as you preach there for the Scottish Presbyterian churches. So there you go. It was one of those stories where I got to a page and a half and still you would have had no idea where that was heading. And indeed, neither did Mrs. Van Straten know exactly where she was heading, because the answer was down a 6-foot hole. What do you say there, Bobby?
Ah, poor lady. I feel really sorry for her. You know, she's taken out on a night out, and it's actually good of her to attend one of her pupils, not one of her star pupils. I mean, I wasn't sure whether he was going to do a kind of a bit of a play for her, and she would have been embarrassed. I thought it was going in a completely different direction. Playing the piano.
You're
looking at me strangely.
What are you talking about?
Oh no, is he? You know, he was part of the
He
music.
went-
It was completely on it.
He went to
Anyway.
stroke her hair passionately and oops.
Anyway, no. Anyway,
No.
I think this is no one's fault. I think it's
Yes.
an accident. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think I look outside the car if I get out of a passenger's door and look down. It's unfortunate. It's a series of unfortunate accidents, and it seems to me that, Gary, that your dad kept it a secret about her not having her own hair. Well, maybe not having much hair. You're forgiven.
A series of unfortunate events. Novice, what do you say?
So, on a point of clarification, is he a reformed Scottish Presbyterian, as he no longer is, or was it the Scottish Reformed Church?
I think it's the church that's reformed. I don't think he's. I don't
He's still
think he
at it.
means he's seen the error of his ways.
No, I wasn't sure. I wasn't decided to become
It doesn't.
agnostic or something.
I don't
Anyway.
think the theology matters too much.
Right. Now, I was
We
all
could do
right
that on
with
the
this
show
until-
tomorrow, couldn't we? The divisions in the church, the
Yes.
Protestant church in Scotland.
Oh, no, I've turned my back on
No, sorry,
them.
you don't need to comment. Go on.
When he said that she wasn't the most pleasant of people, so I don't know why Gary actually even asked her. I actually had a similar to a Mrs. Van Straten in my life, Nigel Horsfall. I had to listen for years to me plinketing the ivories, and it's not much fun listening to people who obviously have got very little talent, and Gary hadn't got that in that department. He did ask her, that was nice. The grass verger on this occasion, Gary, I'm forgiving you.
If you're forgiving him,
Yes,
what do you
yes,
say?
I'm
then,
giving
brother?
him the forgiving him.
I think this story basically depends on how you feel towards Mrs. Van Straten. And there will be lots who have sympathy with her. I somewhat took against her quite a bit for no reason other than probably the name. I don't know why. But and so really she should have been looking where she's going. You've got to look where you're going. We all know that's Room 101. Look where you're going. So is it all her fault? Maybe not. But probably, yes, it is. So let's say definitely forgiven. There you go.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the festive synod of ecclesiastical judgment, I seek holy forgiveness for an event which, while Christmas themed, is still passable in early January. Mark is his name.
Thanks.
Blimey. Pay
I've
attention.
got
at the
it. It
back.
was him.
My confession starts when we're staying with my parents at Lytham St Anne's during the festive season. Just finished, and it was a lovely winter's morning. After we'd opened a few presents and had breakfast, I took our two miniature schnauzers, Archie and Angus, for a walk along the seafront at Lytham. Once on Lytham's promenade, I took the dogs down one of the flights of steps from the prom to the old shoreline below. Then I let them off the leads. I allowed Archie and Angus to run ahead on the sandy track and fulfil their natural needs the way they have to do first thing in the morning. The way we all have to.
Yes,
at various
we all understand.
stages. 3:30 in the morning. After walking a few hundred yards, I spotted ahead of us an elderly lady carrying a large Hessian shopping bag full of Christmas presents, as well as a full plastic carrier bag. She proceeded to put the Hessian bag down on the track and then move a few metres away from it. Being intrigued by the woman's actions, I watched as she started throwing pieces of bread from her carrier bag into the air. Within seconds, the air around her was full of seagulls diving and squabbling as they tried to catch the airborne food. I found out later from my father that this gull feeding was a daily ritual for this particular lady. Being transfixed by the aerial bickering of the gulls, I hadn't noticed Archie and Angus had in fact now wandered up to the lady's Hessian bag. It was then with total dismay, I have to admit, that I saw Archie cocking his leg at the bag, quickly followed by Angus, who also left his canine calling card.
Okay.
Being totally mortified at the dog's actions, I just stood there aghast. Now, at this point, I should have gone over to the lady and apologised, but seeing as she was oblivious of the doggy misdoings behind her, I chose to keep quiet and scarp her. Brave man, Mark. I hastily called the dogs, put them on their leads, and rapidly made for the nearest flight of steps up to the promenade. I tried to convince myself that the dogs had probably been at the drop, dribble stage, and so would hardly wet the bag.
Okay, lovely.
Well, you know, we all
That's
get to that
good.
stage eventually.
Yes, we do. That's believable.
As I climbed the steps, I'd almost convinced myself that no real harm was probably done.
Yeah.
Oh, grow up, Mayo. However, just as we reached the top of the steps, we were passed by a man descending with a huge Alsatian. After we'd exchanged a quick happy Christmas, the man unleashed the dog and it headed straight for the bird-feeding lady. From the promenade, I watched at the following series of events. As the Alsatian neared the lady, stopped, sniffed the air, took a last-minute deviation and headed straight for the present-filled bag. His owner, then seeing his dog start to attentively sniff the bag, sensing what was about to happen, started running towards the dog, shouting, "Alan! No!"
Alan?
Alan.
Alan the dog. Okay. Alan the Alsatian, in fact. Well done.
But it was in vain,
Alan.
because Alan the Alsatian cocked his leg and satisfied his natural urge to add his scent to that of Archie's and Angus's.
Okay.
Hearing the bloke's panic-filled cries to his dog, the gull-feeding lady turned and joined in the chorus of "No!" But Alan had started, and by heaven was Alan going to finish.
Yeah.
At this point, you should remember that big dogs have big bladders, and it
Yes.
appeared to be Alan's first opportunity of the day.
Yes, of course.
As it were.
Yeah.
Not only did he soak the inside of the
No.
bag, and so on. All right, I'll read the next bit out then. After a few seconds of stunned silence, the lady started hysterically berating this man. "You've ruined my Christmas!" she screamed, which is fair enough, really. Yeah. She went on to loudly add, "I'm on my way to spend Christmas Day with my daughter's family. Not only did the bag contain all the presents, a hand-knitted jumper for my grandchildren, canapes to go with the drinks. They're all ruined."
Canapes.
Can't give those presents now. It smells like a public toilet.
Yes, it does.
It just smells like a toilet. Alan's owner kept trying to apologise when he could get a word in, but it was obvious that no words from him were ever going to calm the devastated woman. Now, this is probably the second and best opportunity to apologise for my dog's early misdemeanours and explain that it was actually Archie and Angus who probably caused Alan to act the way Alan did in the first place. However, I chose the more cowardly and safer route of hurriedly heading back to my parents' home, therefore leaving the ladies tearful ranting and the poor dog owners embarrassed apologising behind. I now belatedly seek forgiveness from Alan and his owner, whose leisurely Christmas morning stroll was turned into a walk from hell. I, of course, also apologise to the poor lady whose Christmas was obviously ruined, and to her family, who either didn't get any presents that year or received some strangely smelling gifts. I can only hope that the canapes weren't served with the morning drinks.
No.
Anyway, you can understand how this kind of thing would have happened. Maybe Mark should have stepped up after Angus and Archie had done their business, but he was off back down the prom because he didn't have the guts to actually own up to the poor girl lady. What do you say here, Sister Bobby?
This is very easy, actually. I'm not happy about this because, Mark, if you'd have stepped up and told her, it would have given an opportunity, even on before Alan got involved, with Angus and who was the other one, Archie. Let's face it, they would have left their deposits. They have a special kind of, it wasn't. There was probably still quite a lot left in those two boys, to leave a significant mark on those Christmas presents. If you'd have told that lovely old lady that had happened, she'd have had an opportunity to kind of clean it off or even prepare for her guest that was coming. This is before Alan. This is what I'm saying. This is before Alan. So what you did is you let that lady go off to her Christmas with smelly presents at the very, very least and affecting everything else. At least she'd have had a chance to maybe get them out before it soaked through from the bag.
These canapes,
so I'm sorry, Mark, but actually you're a responsible dog owner. It's not your dog's fault. It's your fault. You should have owned up. And then, if you'd have owned up, maybe Alan wouldn't have done the dirty and had the kind of knock-on effect. So, Mark, as much as I love you and your dogs, you're not forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Yes, the Vol-au-vent's a bit gamey, I think. What am I getting overtones of here? Obviously, onus is on the dog owner to, see where your dog is and all that. But am I alone in thinking that maybe the little old lady should have been keeping an eye on her bags instead of just feeding the seagulls? Maybe if you've got all your prezzies and your vol-au-vents in your bag, keep an eye on your bag. And far be it from me to say little old lady maybe brought it upon herself.
It was her fault,
but
was it?
I'm going to say brought it upon herself. So I am going to forgive.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Mark's confession, Love Me, Love My Dog. For those of you who can't listen to the show in the week, I mean, frankly, you probably can if you just put in a bit more effort.
Oh, really? It's because they're not trying enough, that's what you're saying?
Yeah. You miss out when we hear the reaction from those who were able to listen to it live. So we still appreciate you as a devout member and subscriber of the podcast, but just if you could show a bit more effort, that'd be great. In the podcast, we do share with you occasionally some of the best of the people's verdicts. Mark's confession provoked this text. Mark is not forgiven in any way, shape or form by not owning up he ruined Christmas for the old lady, and also I don't forgive him for calling his dog Alan, says Rachel.
I mean, come on.
Which is, fair comment. Still to come, the confession that was just like a visit to the radio theatre. Make sure that Richard Knuckles is in the cells by midnight before he causes any more mayhem.
Yes.
All done. It's hard to guess which of the many actors.
I
should say that was me, by the way. That was
our very own Mike Yarwood. Yeah.
Thanks, Grandad.
One for the teenagers there.
Yeah, ask your parents. So let's have a look at the parish notice board. Look, there it is. It's been given a New Year spruce. What's the notice that's caught your attention, Bobby?
An email,
It's great acting.
an email from Kirsty Basnett from Malton in lovely North Yorkshire. She emailed to say, "Dear Simon,
Yes.
during the recent festivities, I helped my lovely friend Helen Johnson to not only download a podcast app for the very first time, but also immediately subscribe to the Confessions podcast. Photographic evidence is attached. See that? 3 pictures," says Kirsty.
There you go, that's
As
proved it,
per
yeah.
instructions, Helen is shamefully not always able to listen to the Confessions live, but as recompense, she will be listening on the bus on her commute to Oxford, and she's definitely the type of carefree person to forget herself and laugh out loud while listening, which I love. Anyone who's listening on a coach. Surely this alone is enough to earn me, and possibly her, a Confessions car sticker.
Yeah, I think so.
2 stickers, 1 each.
Can we do 2? 2 stickers
I
it
think
is.
so.
There are
Happy New Year.
I mean, there are absolutely millions.
She says, "I don't do Twitter, but I'd just like to tell you that I'm very, very hot." Go
What?
in peace, Father.
That was the...
What?
That was
Hang on.
That was
Not
the
me.
expression.
Oh,
That-
no, yes, of course.
You had
right,
to tweet.
okay.
It was like the secret phrase.
Sorry, I thought
I've
we'd
had
gone.
so many tweets over the last fortnight. People telling me they're hot.
Do you disagree with them?
No, it's a time of life thing. You know, you get to a certain stage and
Is
you
it?
just feel hot.
Okay.
Matt, what have you got?
Yes, let's move on. Toby emailed in to say, "Dear Bobby and Matt, I am not writing to Simon at the present time because I have a quibble with something he said on the podcast, although I still listen to the podcast because it's very good and I can't boycott it.
I think
Just so you know, though, I am withholding my iTunes rating for the comments Simon made about those who don't tune in to the live show and only listen to the podcast. I believe the word he used was pointless. Unfortunately, I can't listen to the show live because my method of transport after work only has 2 wheels and no radio. You see, I ride a bicycle, reducing congestion for other road users and leaving more petrol for my neighbours. And I'm sure Simon will agree it's probably not good for my health or the overworked NHS for me to take to the streets with headphones in my
Well,
ears.
you could have one headphone in one ear.
No,
No,
you can't.
you can't.
Oh, dear.
Why not?
The only way to enjoy the confessional goodness is via the eagerly anticipated podcast each weekend. And I would hate to be deemed a lesser mortal for neglecting the live show through an inability to afford a car. P.S. Can I have a car sticker for my bike? I'd be truly grateful and would forgive Simon entirely for this minor would forgive Simon entirely for this minor dismissal.
So it's minor
misdemeanor.
misdemeanor.
Minor
Yeah.
disdemeanor.
Go on, say it.
Minor disdemeanor.
No.
How can I not say that? Minor disdemeanor.
No.
This is
That's from that rap
insane.
song,
Try
I
again.
can't say.
Go on.
This
Funky
minor
Cold
disdemeanor. Minor misdemeanor.
No,
This is unbelievable.
Funky Cold
let's break
Medina.
it down.
Misdemeanor. I can say misdemeanor
go.
and I can say minor. Minor misdemeanor. There you go.
Very
Boom,
good.
Got it.
Wow, that took a long time.
Yeah, well done. PPS, can I also have a shout out to my wife, Catherine, who listens to this podcast at least 5 times a week. She listens to it in bed at night and always falls asleep after about 3 minutes.
Thanks a lot,
So starts
Catherine.
again the next... This isn't great. She must be your biggest fan, if only by the number of listens she racks up.
All right, well, so, Catherine, thank you very... Oh, there's no point in reading this out because she will be fast asleep by the
Yes.
time we get there. You can have a car sticker for the bicycle. But I do think, you know, you could... earpiece? One.
No.
No, you can't.
Turn
no,
down,
no,
turn
no.
down.
Don't
In which
listen to
case,
him.
what's the point? No.
Oh, listen again.
Well, Or you could go and sit in a cafe for a couple of hours, have
What?
a cup of tea.
And not go home.
Not
for 2
go home.
hours.
It's a roundabout way for
That was just
listening at
a
home.
serving suggestion.
Yeah.
Reverend Xavier tweeted, Simon, thanks for saying, "Hey Siri" on your podcast. On my device, you're saying this stops the podcast. And if you don't say anything, it rewinds the podcast by 5 seconds and then plays just in time for my phone to hear you saying, "Hey Siri," again. And the cycle continues. Hey Alexa, subscribe to the Confessions podcast. Hey Siri, subscribe to the Confessions podcast. What a great thing it is.
Yes.
Anyway, it could get annoying. Oh, you mean it is already? Now, it's 4 months since we relaunched the podcast, and despite telling you every week that late night confessions is definitely not going to be a thing, still you send in stories of such ill repute that our producer needs to wear a special pair of gloves to even pick them up to read them. And she's got a special blouse that she wears when she's on confessions duties. Please be reminded that we do have to maintain a certain standard of decency on the podcast. This is the BBC after all. And let these following examples of what's not acceptable be a warning to you.
Here it comes.
Okay.
1. Arthur. The prank where you glued your friend to a seat at the rugby club disco might have got through were it not for the fact that when helped out of his trousers, quite a lot of your friend's private hair got left behind on the seat as well. Someone has to clean that up, Arthur. Just think about that for a moment. It's classic rugby club disco.
Yeah.
Was he naked when he sat down?
No, he was in the trousers, but
Yeah.
obviously, it had seeped through.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Cheerful wrote in to tell us about his best friend's wedding. All right, Mr. Cheerful. And particularly the American guest asking why the couple were taking so long to reappear after popping into another room. Instead of simply explaining they were signing the register, Mr. Cheerful, you told the aforementioned guest that the couple were off for the traditional consummation that happens during every English wedding ceremony.
That's a great one. Why didn't that make it?
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
I managed to get all the rest of the guests to agree with you. Much to the poor American woman's shock. That's
Listen,
quite clever.
That's brilliant.
That's very good.
That could have
that
made
could have made
it.
it.
That could have made it in. Anyway, I think that's harsh.
Hmm.
Another shocking tale, quite literally, comes from Youngster, who told us about his stint working on a New Zealand farm. He recalls the time where he took an ill-advised shortcut on the tractor and managed to knock over an electric fence, nearly killing herds of cows and their farmer who were in a nearby puddle.
Okay.
There is nothing funny about that.
No, there isn't really. No.
On balance,
Yes, we disapprove.
we disapprove, so that's not getting on. And David's tale about needing to use the bathroom whilst at his local salsa class.
This is already brilliant.
It
Go
doesn't end well. David borrows a phrase from a popular brand of crisps to describe what happened when his nerves forced him to go to the loo. Once you pop, you just can't stop. And the story ends with the class and the bar next door having to be evacuated.
Really?
Much like
Yeah.
David. Now that is understandable. That's the, I'm glad we didn't do that one.
Quite right.
Now, to be clear, none of those were okay, although one of them was pretty good. Send us your confessions, please, but ask, would you want us to read this out and laugh at what you've got to say? If you would, then it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. We received, I guess you could call this our first U-rated confession this week. Came in from Conrad, aged 5, who wrote in with his own confession. And this is it. It's quite short. And it came in a slightly dishevelled envelope with this written on the outside of the envelope. Okay, so this is a message on the outside of the envelope. Dear Simon and the Considerate Collective, please find enclosed my 5-year-old's confession. Now, I haven't read it, so I'm not entirely sure exactly what he did to his sister, but he does give us a very cheeky smile when he's asked, and it did get him writing. My own confession, says Claire, who's Conrad's mum, is I completely forgot about Conrad's letter and left it in the car. As you can see from the dog paw print and general smudging, I seek no forgiveness, as I've actually now posted it as promised, and as the youngest of 3, Conrad gets away with a great deal. Hope you had a lovely Christmas, from Claire, Conrad's mum. So this is the confession. It's very brief, but I'm going to read it out from Conrad, age 5. Dear Simon Mayo, I have a confession. I hid in my sister's bedroom and woke my sister up. From Conrad, age 5.
Well done. Yes.
Well done.
So much going on there.
Do you think he might have hid under the bed or something and then waited for her to fall asleep, or hid in the wardrobe?
I think he was in the cupboard.
Yeah, you've got to think that the wardrobe's better, isn't it? Because if you're under the bed, then there's always the chance that you might get crushed under the bed by your big sister. So,
And of course, because she's a lovely big sister, I bet she wasn't too cross.
well, they're not all lovely.
I see. So do you forgive Conrad?
How could I not forgive this lovely, 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 mischievous little boy?
Yes, obviously forgiven.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Do you think mini confessions would work? I mean, that was literally one line. Are they like nursery confessions or kind of primary school
Like
confessions?
under 12s or something.
I think it's younger. I think it's younger than that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Do they have to be able to write their own, or can mum and dad help?
This has been written by Conrad, so
Yeah.
I think you don't want it written by a parent or an elder brother.
No.
This needs to be written. So Conrad's 5. Let's see what happens. But certainly it's a primary school only.
Yes, definitely.
Let's see what we get for mini confessions. Certainly you rated just to balance the smut and disgusting.
You don't think it
nature.
would encourage them to be more mischievous, do you? I mean, I'd hate
hope
to do
so.
that.
Anyway, we still have some of our fabulous Drive Time car stickers going spare, so we'll generously send you a bumper sticker if, 1, you're the first to tweet the end of podcast code word, 2, if you can get another member of your family to subscribe to the podcast, obviously photographic proof, which Bobby was mentioning earlier, and you need to send it to confessions@bbc.co.uk, or you send us some interesting correspondence, which Conrad's mum has done precisely that,
Yes.
so we'll send you a sticker. Currently working through the Christmas backlog of photographic proof that have been sent in. Photographs everywhere. Stickers will be heading out in the post as and when we get to them. So this week's confessions, let's revisit Doc of Dixon Green's confession, which is called Caught by the Fuzz.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Disciples of Judgment and Forgiveness. My confession dates back to 1998, when I was a young in-service police constable in the northeast of England. On my first day with my new shift, I was faced with a sergeant who refused to speak to me until I had proven my worth, and an inspector who was to be avoided at all times. When the inspector was on duty, it was his police station. It was his town and his police force. This was a man who joined the service in the early 70s, so discipline was his middle name. Short haircuts, clean shaves, sharply pressed uniform, and smart boots, they were an absolute must. Ultimate professionalism was his goal, but unfortunately one of his constables, i.e. me, didn't share this view, and I would ultimately pay the price. Now, the late 1990s had seen a huge surge in theft from and theft of motor vehicles. Each and every constable would deal with a couple of these offences each shift, and car chases were the rule rather than the exception. One particular delinquent youth responsible for these types of crimes, we'll call him Knuckles McGinty, had been I don't think we've changed his name there. I think that he really was Knuckles McGinty. Had been arrested almost 100 times. Knuckles was causing the inspector much angst, and most night shifts began with the inspector instructing, make sure that wretched Knuckles is in the cells by midnight before he causes any more mayhem.
Yes. Great accent. Lovely.
First
of the new year. Well done.
He spoke like the Verger for
no
no reason.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Now, at this time, a young colleague from my shift was living with his parents, and therefore had plenty of spare cash. With this spare dough, he'd bought himself a shiny new Japanese sports car, which he lovingly cared for and polished every week. One night, my colleague parked his shiny new Japanese sports car in the town centre whilst he took a young lady for a night out. However, on returning to his car, he found that some horrible oik had smashed his window and stolen his stereo. This kind of thing used to happen a lot. He was incensed. How could somebody have the audacity to do such a thing to a police officer? To a police officer! Fortunately, the baddie didn't wear any gloves. The scene of crimes officer lifted several fingerprints and sent them for analysis. After a couple of weeks, this is how long it took back in the 90s, the results of the fingerprint analysis were back, and it was our very own Knuckles who had broken into our colleague's car and stolen his stereo. There was a collective frenzy on the shift as we ignored every speeding motorist, disorderly, drunk and unruly youth in our pursuit of Knuckles McGinty, determined to seek justice for our colleague. It wasn't long before I was the lucky one who arrested Knuckles and had him in the interview room. With such strong evidence, he could... Do you think this would make a good TV series?
It's going very well so far, yeah.
He couldn't deny it was he who had committed the heinous act, and he was duly charged. I then had to fingerprint Knuckles, photograph him, and take a sample of his DNA. Being 1998, there was no digital fingerprinting. These were the days of thick black ink, brass plates, and a roller to distribute the ink. A few dots of ink were put on the brass plate, then a hard roller was used to spread the ink across the plate. When all of the brass plate was covered in ink, the fingers and the thumbs would be rolled in the ink before placing the fingers and thumbs onto the paper, which would record the fingerprints. Is that clear? I think that is. This process was followed to the letter with Knuckles. Now, being a seasoned veteran of the process, Knuckles believed that his time in the fingerprint room was over. Unfortunately, it was not, because an uncontrollable urge for tomfoolery had passed over me, says Doc of Dixon Green. All done? Asked Knuckles. He hasn't spoken to this point about that.
No. Yeah.
Not quite, chummy, I replied. We've still got the ears to do. You what? He says. Well, I continued in a very stern and convincing tone, we've had a spate of burglars recently. We've noticed that the burglars have been putting their ears against windows to listen out for whenever someone is coming. As ear prints are as unique to a person as their fingerprints, the Chief Constable has decided that we must now print the ears of everybody who's been charged with a theft. I then proceeded to firmly run the ink-rolled roller up and down Knuckles' ears until both were covered in thick black ink. I then simultaneously applied a piece of paper to either side of Knuckles' head and pressed firmly towards the centre of his head, thus producing two fantastic prints of his ears. Work of art it was. I was surprised how good they were. Even wondered if the process might become the norm. Knuckles dutifully signed his ear prints, as was the Chief Constable's instruction, and we were all finished. I directed Knuckles to the sink, where there was a large tub of green swarfiga, and he proceeded to clean his hands and his ears. Unfortunately, the sink was only designed for suspects to clean their hands, so no mirror was present. Knuckles' attempt at a clean-up was reflective of the absence of a mirror, because he didn't do a very good job. As the custody process was completed, Knuckles was led to the front desk and out of the police station. Unfortunately for me, as he was walking across the car park, the inspector was just returning to the building, and their paths crossed. Moments later, the inspector entered the constable's report writing room and asked in a very stern inspector's voice, "Can anyone tell me why Knuckles McGinty is walking across my car park with fingerprint ink and swarfiga in his ears? What is going on?" The report writing room instantly emptied, and I alone was left to explain that Knuckles had been his usual naughty self in the fingerprint room, but it was no big deal as I had managed to contain the situation. I might have gotten away with this fib, but unfortunately it was at that point that the inspector looked down onto the desk and saw the beautiful ear prints which had been signed by Knuckles. I had never been called an imbecile before, and to be honest, I had to look it up in the dictionary. 3 months of winter foot patrol followed, where I was never allowed anywhere near a warm panda. I obviously don't seek forgiveness from Knuckles. It's a warm panda. It's a panda car.
I've got it now. Yeah.
There aren't pandas in the northeast of England.
Please.
There's a whole different thing going on there.
I obviously don't seek forgiveness from Knuckles McGinty. He was a rotter who brought misery to half the town. I do, however, seek forgiveness from the inspector, who was let down by a juvenile act from a public servant who should have known better. But most of all, I seek forgiveness from Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. You might have seen her in The Crown. You see, I've been awarded a medal with the Queen's head on it. On the medal is engraved "for long service and exemplary conduct." Without forgiveness, I feel unable to ever wear this medal again, as clearly Doc of Dixon Green has had occasion when exemplary conduct was not what he was particularly famous for. Sister Bobby.
Well, just to go off on a tangent here, if Knuckles McGinty had been arrested over 100 times for twocking, why hadn't you kind of ceased this? You know, all the evidence was there. He wasn't wearing gloves, was he? So I'm just a little bit disappointed that Doc of Dixon Green hadn't kind of, ceased his kind of, what's it called? You know, when you're set loose, with lots of...
A crime spree?
Yes, and they'd arrested him 100 times, so why hadn't they got enough evidence to charge him?
Well,
he wasn't that smart and he wasn't that clever. So that's just going off a tangent. So I think, really, you should always follow procedure in these circumstances. Don't want to be, a stickler for the rules, but I think I'm not going to forgive. I'm slightly disappointed in Doc of Dixon Green.
Yeah, well, I think... I do like the picture of him with two pieces of paper on either side of Knuckles' head getting the ear prints. What do you think there, Matthew?
Well, it's at times like these that I wonder what would Ted Hastings out of Line of Duty have thought of this. What would he have thought of this? He'd have probably thought, well, there is a grain of truth to this, isn't there? Because ear prints are, of course, or our ears are unique to us. So taking an ear print isn't ridiculous. But I think it's quite clear that that Mr. Knuckles knew exactly what was going on because he brought it up with the inspector in the car park. So, no harm, no foul. Everyone was fine in the end. And, yes, so I'm definitely going to forgive.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Doc of Dixon's Green confession caught by the fuzz, which prompted this reaction in the People's Verdict. It's at times like this, says Gillian Surrey.
Yes, it is.
I find myself wondering what Jack Regan of the Sweeney would have done, to which the answer is almost, shut it. Cover 'em up, you're nicked. And that's kind of it
good.
for this week's batch of confessions. Maybe it's inspired you to send in yours, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Before we leave you, we've got another treat from the Confessions Crypt. This week has been requested by Ed Hart, Matthew Standing, Jennifer Galley, Becky Ball, Mike in Bishop Auckland and Eileen Hampton, who say, this is Eileen, I imagine it's her letter. Simon, we live in the US and download your Confessions podcast weekly. Not sure if you're still looking for favourite confession episodes, but if you are, and we are, ours is the shipping forecast one. Maybe it's due to the element of nostalgia with us living so far away, but it's the one confession that is stuck in our minds and we still talk about it whenever confessions are mentioned. So this really is a classic. Here is the one that we called No Ball of Confusion.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, I beg forgiveness, not for something I've already done, but something that could happen any moment now. Back in the late 1980s, I was in middle management for a local council. At this time, there was an international graduate scheme where students from overseas universities took placements with UK local government to help their studies in public administration. It picks up a bit. We'd have several attractive young ladies from Europe and the Far East, which my boss, surprise, surprise, had been happy to mentor personally. But our next graduate was an American who must have been the dullest, most boring man in Christendom with a drawling, grating accent that didn't help either. Strangely, my boss suddenly lost interest in the scheme and volunteered me to be the dull American's mentor, as if I didn't have enough work to do. Now, all day long, he'd follow me around, irritatingly pronouncing my name, which usually preceded a never-ending barrage of questions. How does this work? What do you do? How do you do it? Why do you do it in the UK? How do you calculate the rate support grant? Not understanding that the basic remit of British public administration is, we don't really know. Anyway, things got worse on day 2. The boss breezed in to see how he was getting on, and on hearing where the dull American's hotel accommodation was, cheerfully exclaimed, "Oh, that's near Bob. He can give you a lift home every night." Now, as your very own Dr. Mosh fully understands, the main purpose of the hour or so drive from a stressful day at the office back home to the pressures of young family life, baby stapling and all that, is not to get from A to B. No, the main purpose is to turn up the volume to 11 and scream along to Motorhead.
Oh, indeed.
That is the purpose of the drive home. But now the dull American even invaded this bit of my precious personal space. He didn't like Motorhead. He liked to listen to the PM programme on Radio 4. Now, there's nothing wrong with the PM programme, but listen is the wrong word for this dull American. He liked to comment and pontificate on each and every news item, and heaven help me if there was a story on the Americas, as he would regale me with long-winded explanations of the workings of their government. It was a wall of droning noise, Simon, all the way, until 5 to 6. Then he fell silent, for at that time in those days, on came the wonderful Brian Perkins with the shipping forecast. The American's face was a picture of incredulity as he stared at the car radio, trying to make sense of Brian Perkins' clipped BBC tones explaining the offshore and coastal weather conditions. Now, like 99% of the UK population, I didn't really have a clue what Brian was going on about, but Simon, I couldn't help myself. After each dogger, northeast, 3 or 4, moderate, I would give a knowing or after Finisterre, German bite, veering northwest, turning cyclonic, good, I would give a surprise, oh, phew, thank heavens. Or after Lundy, Tyne, Rockall, southwest, 4, moderate to good, I would give a, yes, come on. This went on for 2 or 3 nights until the dull American finally snapped and said, what is this? Oh, I said, it's the cricket scores. So the next day I told my colleagues what I'd done, so that they wouldn't drop me in it and that I'd been pulling his leg. That's all I asked them to do. But no, this story spread throughout the town hall, and instead of just covering my back, they joined in the fun whenever the dull American appeared. If he wandered near the communal tea urn, people saw him coming and immediately switched their conversation to such things as, do you hear the scores last night? How can Brian Perkins say Fair Isle and Viking were poor? It was a cracking match. Or as I took him round the town hall, staff who I'd never met before would look up from their desks and punch the air, shout, forward Finisterre! Come on, Cromarty! Even the Lord Mayor joined in. During a break from a committee meeting, shouting across the council chamber to me, hey Bob, I missed the scores last night. How did Forties get on? 1008, rising slowly, I replied. For 3 weeks this went on until the dull American returned to the US, by now thoroughly convinced that Dover, Lundy, Mallinhead were amongst England's finest cricket teams. But I don't seek forgiveness for this because A, he was boring, and B, he didn't like Motorhead. I lay prostrate before you, Father Simon, because of this. Shortly after the dull American departed, I entered the civil service. About 2 years ago, 2 years into my new career, I heard from my old colleagues at the town hall that the American had been in touch and graduated and had a new career as a civil servant in the White House. The dull American, long forgotten, I had quite a good career, says B, ending up briefing number 10 and other senior ministers on important stuff, although mostly just stuff. My time in the civil service came to an end in 2010. But the nightmare scenario has only just struck me. If the dull American has followed the same career trajectory as me, then at this very moment he's probably at the level where he's briefing the President of the United States. So if, On the next state visit, President Obama bounces down the stairs from Air Force One to give David Cameron a jaunty forward Finisterre. Or even worse, at the obligatory royal banquet, sidles up to Her Majesty to see if she can wangle some tickets for the key event in the British sporting calendar, the famous local derby between Northursire and Southursire. Could I please beg forgiveness in advance? It may help with any subsequent trial and possibly reduce my stretch in the tower. Well, it's the first time I think Brian Perkins, the shipping forecast, Radio 4, the PM programme, and more importantly, Dr. Mosh and Motorhead have all been included in one tale. What say you, Sister
I love this
Rebecca?
story. I love it so much, but I don't remember the shipping forecast being on in the evening. Wasn't it always on in the morning? Anyway, irrelevant,
it's on
irrelevant
about,
detail.
It's on about midnight.
Whatever. Okay. Anyway, irrelevant detail. I think it's absolutely great. And I love the idea of this dull American going and spreading the news about Britain's cricket teams. I hope he does brief the president, and I do hope that Obama does come skipping down the stairs talking to Cameron about Northursire. So I think fantastic. You're completely forgiven, B. Great gig.
That is the way to do cricket scores, isn't it? 1008.
Good.
Rising slowly. Mother Superior.
Well, first of all, Simon, and I don't know how my colleagues here feel, Rebecca and Mark, I thought that was the most sterling acting performance that you've ever given in terms of story. I think a little round of applause for that. You were very, very good. You had me gripped, I have to say, the whole way through. I think this is very, very funny. It's very, very apt, really, for a very boring sort of guy that's following you around. And, you know, he's American, no offence. So I think it was a great story, and I think he deserved everything he got, really.
So forgiven then. Now, Brother Matthew.
Truly, the shipping forecast is quintessentially British. It is one of those things that if you would be able to tell whether someone was British by saying things like Dogger, Fisher, Finisterre, and they'd know what you're on about. So I love this because, bluntly, the guy's a bit dull. That's why we love it, because he's a bit boring and he's got one of those voices, and how we hate the people with the boring voices. So, frankly, he got off lightly with just being told about the cricket being the shipping forecast.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
And that was the confession from the crypt this week, featuring Mother Superior,
Yes.
then popping in. And I think I'm right. That's the only time the shipping confession has been used in a confession, but splendidly ingenious.
As I said, it's a fine piece of work. And if you didn't know the shipping forecast, it's a great introduction to it.
And turning it into cricket scores.
Yes, inspired.
And obviously a throwback to different times with the President and the Prime Minister.
Yes.
All of which have moved
Far
on.
simpler times.
Is that right?
Probably.
If you request a vintage confession, send us the details in the normal email, confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our best to dig them out of the crypt. So as much information as you could give due to our unique filing system, it would just help point us in the right direction. So, Sister Bobby, you forgave just one this week. Which starts off your tally for the new year. Matt, you forgave all three because you're a big
Come on, everyone.
art student pushover.
What?
If you're planning...
Art student pushover?
Kind of. Confessions@bbc.co.uk. If you made it to the end of the last podcast, you had to tweet a weaponised sprout. And if you got to the sneaky extra bit at the end of the Best of 2017 podcast, you had to tweet I'm very, very hot, which has been very entertaining.
Yeah.
Thanks to John, who was the first to tweet the weaponised sprout code word. And Catherine, Ed, Verity, Jasky Joe, Claire, Andrew, Colin, Tina, and loads more who did just that. This week's code phrase is... I wasn't allowed anywhere near a warm panda. It could have been, but I don't want to go to Winnipeg. What do you think?
Oh, no.
Yes.
Warm panda or Winnipeg?
Warm
Warm
panda.
panda.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed anywhere near a warm panda. That'll do. Remember to subscribe, and don't forget you can hear our whole radio show, all 2 hours of it, every weekday from 5 on BBC Radio 2. Thank you so much.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.